By the time the second sheriff's cruiser blocked the muddy lane, the bulldozer was already sitting with one track sunk halfway into the creek bank. Rain had fallen all night over Blount County, hard enough to turn the red Tennessee clay into something slick and heavy. Blue lights flashed against the wet sycamore trunks. Water slapped beneath the old wooden bridge in brown, swollen sheets, carrying leaves, broken twigs, and the smell of storm-soaked earth. The bulldozer's engine had just been shut off, but heat still rose from its yellow hood in thin white breath. Ethan Miller stood on the bridge with mud up to his shins and rain dripping from the brim of his cap. His left hand rested on the rail his father had sanded smooth 20 years earlier. His right hand held a folder wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Across from him, Karen Whitlock stood near the contractor's truck in a cream-colored raincoat that looked as if it had never touched a farm road before that morning. Her face had gone pale in a way no expensive makeup could hide. Behind her, 3 Cedar Ridge Estates board members stared at the creek as if the water itself had betrayed them. The county building inspector was there. So was a deputy with a dash cam still recording. Half a dozen residents from the subdivision had gathered behind the cruisers, phones raised, shoulders hunched against the drizzle. They had come expecting to see an unsafe old bridge removed. Instead, they were watching a surveyor kneel beside a giant sycamore on Ethan's side of the creek, scraping wet leaves away from its roots with a gloved hand. Samuel Reed was 71 years old, narrow-shouldered, quiet, and stubborn in the way only an old surveyor could be. He had spent 40 years reading land like other men read newspapers. He pushed aside a mat of moss, dug 2 inches into the mud with a hand trowel, and stopped. The metal detector beside him gave a thin, steady chirp. Everyone seemed to lean forward at once. Samuel wiped the mud away and exposed the top of a rusted iron pin, square-headed, reddish-brown, buried so long it had grown into the memory of the hillside. He tapped it once with the handle of the trowel. The sound was small, dull, and final. The inspector looked down at the 1962 survey in Samuel's hand, then at the bright orange line Samuel had already flagged through the brush. That line cut between Cedar Ridge's new wooden stakes and the creek, leaving the bulldozer, the contractor's trailer, the bridge approach, and every muddy footprint on private Miller land. The sheriff's deputy asked who had authorized heavy equipment to enter the property. No one answered. The rain ticked against the bulldozer blade. The creek kept roaring beneath the bridge. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and glanced toward the residents who had trusted every word she had said for the last 8 months. Ethan did not smile. He was too tired for that. He only looked down at the iron pin, the old marker his grandfather had paid to set before Cedar Ridge existed, before Karen Whitlock knew this valley had a name, before a developer had drawn fake walking trails over land that had never belonged to him. 8 months earlier, Ethan had come home to bury his father and save what was left of the Miller place. The farm was not grand. It did not have white fences or rolling pastures fit for postcards. It was 38 acres of stubborn ground tucked between a county road, a limestone creek, and the wooded ridge that now held the new subdivision. There was a tin-roof barn with one sagging corner, a small cabin with cedar shakes, an equipment shed that smelled of oil and hay, and a wooden bridge crossing Cedar Fork Creek. Ethan's grandfather, Henry Miller, had built the bridge in 1964 with 2 neighbors, a borrowed auger, and more confidence than money. The bridge was only wide enough for a pickup or a compact tractor, with oak decking, timber rails, and steel beams salvaged from an old county culvert project. For most people, it looked like an aging farm bridge. For Ethan, it was the spine of the property. On the far side of it sat the back meadow, the old orchard, the spring house, and the cabin where Ethan's parents had spent weekends after they retired. His mother had kept red geraniums in a clay pot at the east end of the bridge every spring. His father, Robert, had swept leaves from the decking on Sunday mornings, even after his knees started hurting. Ethan had learned to drive across that bridge before he was tall enough to see properly over the dashboard. He had left home at 22, studied civil engineering, and spent 16 years with the Tennessee Department of Transportation inspecting rural bridges, drainage structures, and failing roadbeds. He knew what rot looked like. He knew what settlement looked like. He knew when an old structure was tired but still serviceable, and when someone was calling it dangerous because the word was useful. After Robert Miller died of a stroke, Ethan packed up his apartment in Knoxville and came back to the farm. The first weeks were a blur of casseroles, condolences, bank papers, unpaid bills, and the strange silence of a house missing the man who had always made noise in it. He slept badly. He woke before sunrise. He walked the property because walking was easier than sitting inside with the empty recliner. The bridge became his first project because it was something he could understand. Grief had no measurements. Timber did. He replaced 6 deck boards, tightened bolts, scraped moss from the north rail, and crawled underneath with a flashlight to inspect the beams. He photographed the connections, marked soft spots with chalk, and made notes in a weatherproof field book. The bridge needed maintenance, but it was not failing. It had carried tractors, feed trucks, and his father's old Ford for 60 years. It deserved repairs, not demolition. Cedar Ridge Estates had been carved into the wooded hill east of the farm 2 years before Robert died. Ethan had not paid much attention to it at first. Developers had been pushing out from Knoxville for years, turning cattle fields and timber lots into gated roads with names like Autumn Hollow and Stonebrook Reserve. Cedar Ridge had 36 houses, fiber internet, stone mailboxes, and a homeowners association that sent glossy newsletters on thick paper. The sales brochures had called the valley below the subdivision a protected greenbelt. They showed morning mist over Cedar Fork Creek and used soft focus photos of trees, water, and a rustic bridge. Ethan had seen one of those brochures once in the county clerk's office and laughed bitterly because the rustic bridge in the picture was his. He assumed it was careless marketing, annoying but not dangerous. That changed in March, when he found fresh footprints in the mud near the cabin. Then dog tracks. Then a candy wrapper tucked beside the bridge rail. A week later, he drove down to the creek and saw 2 women from Cedar Ridge taking pictures on the bridge, while a golden retriever splashed in the shallows below. They waved at him like visitors on a public trail. Ethan did what his father would have wanted him to do before losing his temper. He stayed polite. He mailed a letter to the Cedar Ridge HOA office explaining that the bridge, creek bank, and road were private property. He included a copy of the county tax parcel map and asked that residents be reminded not to cross the boundary. He put up 2 small signs at the east trail cut, plain white aluminum, reading "Private property, no trespassing." 3 days later, he received his first email from Karen Whitlock. Karen was the HOA president, though every sentence she wrote carried the weight of someone who considered herself more than that. She thanked him for reaching out, then informed him that Cedar Ridge residents had long understood the creek corridor to be a shared scenic access area. She referred to the old bridge as a community feature. She suggested that his signs created an unfriendly appearance inconsistent with the neighborhood's values. Ethan read the email twice at his kitchen table while Rain tapped the window over the sink. Then he printed the deed, highlighted the parcel number, attached the tax map again, and replied that he was not a member of the HOA, that no easement existed across his land, and that the bridge had been built and maintained by the Miller family since 1964. Karen did not answer for a week. Instead, the signs vanished. Ethan found one in the creek, bent in half against a rock. The other was gone completely. He stood at the trail cut with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking up the slope toward the backs of the Cedar Ridge homes. Their windows shone warmly through the trees. Somewhere above him, a dog barked and a leaf blower whined like a dentist drill. He installed a chain across the trail entrance and hung a new sign from it. The next morning, the chain was still there. By Saturday afternoon, someone had looped a child's bicycle over it and left muddy shoe prints around the side. Ethan agreed to attend the next HOA meeting because he still believed reasonable people could fix unreasonable misunderstandings. He brought a folder with copies of the deed, the tax map, photos of the bridge, and his father's old property insurance statement. The meeting was held in the Cedar Ridge Clubhouse, a stone front building with electric lanterns, polished floors, and a coffee station that looked more expensive than Ethan's first truck. Karen sat at the front table with 2 board members and a man Ethan recognized from the development company's website, Mark Ellison. He had sold half the neighborhood on creek views and nature access. He wore a navy vest with the company logo over the chest and never once looked surprised. Ethan waited while residents discussed mailbox stains, trash bin visibility, and the approved shades of exterior shutters. When Karen finally introduced the creek access issue, she did not describe it as trespassing. She described it as a neighbor refusing to cooperate with the community. Ethan stood with his folder and explained the situation as calmly as he could. He described the parcel boundary. He explained that the bridge was private, that it connected parts of his farm, and that strangers on the structure created liability and safety concerns. He He said he was happy to be a good neighbor but could not allow open access across land his family owned. Karen let him speak just long enough for the room to grow restless. Then she shifted the discussion to safety and aesthetics. She claimed the bridge appeared obsolete, that it attracted children to the creek, and that its weathered rails lowered the appearance of the Cedar Ridge greenbelt. She said the HOA had a duty to protect residents from hazards near association property. Ethan clarified again that it was not association property. The correction landed and disappeared. People heard what they had already paid to believe. They had bought homes advertised with peaceful creek access. Ethan was the man telling them the brochure had lied. By the time he walked back to his truck, the air outside had turned cold. He sat in the parking lot for a full minute before starting the engine. Through the clubhouse windows, he could see Karen at the front of the room, one hand raised, the board nodding around her. Mark Ellison leaned back with his arms folded, calm as a man watching someone else do work that benefited him. The first letter did not feel dangerous when it arrived. It looked almost silly, printed on thick HOA letterhead and written with the chilly confidence of people who had mistaken formatting for authority. Cedar Ridge ordered Ethan to remove the private property signs because they created an unfriendly visual impression for residents using the creek corridor. Ethan answered with restraint. He sent the deed, the county parcel map, and a short explanation that he was not a Cedar Ridge homeowner, had never signed its covenants, and did not consent to public access across his land. Karen did not argue with the deed. She changed the battlefield. Within a week, the issue was no longer signs, it was safety. A notice appeared in Cedar Ridge's newsletter describing the old bridge as a deteriorating hazard near a family walking area. The photographs were cropped tight around weathered boards and mossy rails, never wide enough to show the posted chain, the private road, or the repair materials stacked neatly under Ethan's tarp. By Sunday, residents who had never spoken to him were calling the bridge a lawsuit waiting to happen. Ethan hired an independent engineer from Maryville to inspect the structure. The report was measured and practical. The bridge needed maintenance, but it was serviceable for limited private farm use, with posted load limits and continued repairs. Ethan sent the report to the HOA board, expecting the safety argument to quiet down. Karen shifted again. Now the bridge was not only unsafe, it was unauthorized. A new letter claimed the structure conflicted with Cedar Ridge's planned greenbelt improvements and demanded that Ethan either grant access for remediation or remove the bridge within 30 days. The letter avoided saying the HOA owned the land. It only used phrases like community reliance, scenic access expectations, and shared corridor maintenance, soft words that tried to step around the hard fact of ownership. Then the pressure moved from paper to people. At the next HOA meeting, Karen presented the creek as a promise residents had paid for. She described Ethan as a neighboring landowner obstructing a community amenity. She did not need to accuse him directly. The room did the work for her. By the following morning, the Cedar Ridge Facebook group was full of comments about greed, rural stubbornness, and one man keeping children away from nature. A few days later, Ethan found the first lock cut. The chain across the informal trail entrance lay in the mud, its bright metal throat freshly bitten through. Tire tracks led down toward the bridge and back. Nothing had been stolen. That made it worse. Whoever came through had not wanted tools or scrap. They wanted Ethan to understand that the boundary was becoming optional. He filed a sheriff's report, replaced the lock, and installed one camera at the gate, high enough to be seen and hard enough to reach. He did not scatter cameras across the farm yet. He wanted a clean record at the one place where any honest person would have to stop before entering. Karen used even that against him. When a deputy responded to her complaint the next week, she described the camera, chain, and signs as aggressive behavior aimed at families. Ethan stood beside the gate with his folder while the deputy compared Karen's glossy sales map to Ethan's recorded parcel. The deputy did not open the gate or order Ethan to remove anything. He only said the dispute appeared civil and both sides should document everything. By sunset, Karen had turned that into a public victory. A message went out to Cedar Ridge residents saying law enforcement had confirmed an ongoing access dispute and that the board would continue pursuing the community's rights. The wording was careful enough to avoid a clean lie and bold enough to convince anyone who wanted to believe it. Ethan read the screenshot at his kitchen table with his father's old lamp throwing yellow light across the paper. He had answered politely, documented carefully, and paid professionals to inspect the bridge. Each time, Karen had stepped sideways instead of stopping. Signs became safety. Safety became aesthetics. Aesthetics became community rights. Community rights became pressure. Pressure became a cut lock. That night, wind pushed rain against the kitchen windows, and Ethan understood that Karen was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to exhaust him until surrender felt cheaper than being right. For 2 nights, Ethan barely slept. He considered offering a narrow walking easement just to make the pressure stop. He considered selling the creek strip. He even walked down to the bridge at midnight with a flashlight and wondered whether removing it himself would be easier than fighting everyone. The water beneath the bridge answered with the same steady sound it had made all his life. Not loud, not dramatic, persistent. On the 3rd morning, Ethan opened his father's metal filing cabinet in the barn office. Robert Miller had saved everything. Insurance receipts, cattle sale records, equipment manuals, handwritten notes, tax bills, survey invoices, and envelopes from men who had been dead for 30 years. The lower drawer stuck when Ethan pulled it, then released with a groan that stirred dust into the air. He found the 1987 fence dispute file first. Seeing it made his stomach tighten. When Ethan was 9, his father had fought a boundary dispute with a neighbor who had more money and a louder attorney. Robert had been right, but being right had still cost him 2 years, thousands of dollars, and a bitterness he carried for the rest of his life. Ethan remembered his mother at the kitchen table, bills spread out like bad weather, telling Robert that pride could bankrupt a family. Beneath that file was a folder labeled Old Survey, written in his father's blocky hand. Inside was a brittle copy of a 1962 survey by McCready and Sons, long before Cedar Ridge, long before the hill was subdivided. The paper had yellowed at the folds, the ink had faded, but the calls were legible. Iron pin near West Bank Sycamore, stone marker below Creek Crossing, bearing north 37 degrees east, distance 216 feet to ridgeline. Ethan sat on an overturned bucket and read the description 3 times. The tax map he had been using was modern, simplified, and never meant for precise boundary disputes. The old survey was different. It described physical monuments. If the iron pin and stone marker still existed, the legal boundary could be reconstructed. He took the survey to the County Register of Deeds. The clerk found the recorded deed from 1962 and the transfer to Robert in 1991. The language matched. She also pulled the plat for Cedar Ridge Estates. Its boundary stopped at a line that, on paper, should not have touched the creek bank at all. Somewhere between the legal plat and the marketing brochure, the creek had been pulled into Cedar Ridge's story. Ethan made copies of everything. Then he called Samuel Reed. Samuel had retired from full-time surveying 6 years earlier, but his name still appeared in courthouse conversations whenever old rural boundaries were involved. He agreed to meet Ethan at the farm after hearing the surveyor's name on the 1962 map. McCready and Sons had been known for setting good monuments, he said, and good monuments often outlived bad paperwork. The first day they searched, rain threatened but never fell. Samuel moved slowly, not because he was weak, but because he refused to rush land. He studied the old map, checked the creek bend, measured from the county road, and compared bearings against tree lines that had shifted over 60 years. Ethan carried a brush cutter, a shovel, and a metal detector borrowed from a friend who hunted Civil War relics. They found junk first. A horseshoe, fence wire, 2 beer cans from the 1970s, a rusted hinge. Each beep made Ethan's heart jump and drop. Near the creek crossing, Samuel found a flat stone half buried below a tangle of honeysuckle. It was not proof by itself, but its location matched one call in the survey. He marked it with orange flagging tape and told Ethan not to celebrate yet. The iron pin near the sycamore remained hidden. For the next 2 weeks, Ethan worked his day job remotely in the mornings and searched records in the afternoons. He requested HOA submissions from the county planning office under public records rules. He asked for permits related to Cedar Ridge Greenbelt improvements. He pulled archived planning commission minutes from the year Cedar Ridge had been approved. The documents did not shout, they whispered. The official development plat showed no pedestrian easement across Miller land. The landscape improvement application submitted by the HOA included a drawing labeled Creekside Trail Enhancement. On that drawing, Ethan's bridge was marked as existing obsolete footbridge to be removed. His parcel number was absent. The contractor notes described clearing brush, installing gravel, and removing unsafe wooden crossing at the South Creek access. Ethan stared at those words for a long time. Removing unsafe wooden crossing. not requesting permission, not resolving ownership, removing. One attachment contained email comments between Karen and the contractor. Most were dull scheduling notes. One message from Mark Ellison stood out because it advised that the creek edge was sensitive and that association control should be verified before work began. Karen's reply stated that the board had authority to proceed under resident safety and common area maintenance obligations. It was not a confession, but it showed warning. It showed knowledge. It showed they had been told to verify and chose momentum instead. Ethan printed the email and put it in the folder. After the cut lock, Ethan stopped treating the trespassing as a misunderstanding. He spent one Saturday setting up a small evidence system the way he once prepared inspection files for the state. One camera went above the main gate, angled low enough to catch license plates and high enough that bolt cutters could not reach it. A second went in the hayloft window of the barn, looking down the private road toward the bridge. The third, smaller and painted dull brown, went on the hickory tree near the creek crossing, where it could see the bridge approach without being obvious from the trail. He photographed each sign, each chain, each lock, and each camera location with timestamps. He made a map of the property entrance and marked the sight lines in pencil. Then he saved the files in 3 places: his laptop, an external drive in the gun safe, and a cloud folder Patricia Vance would later call the most organized trespass record she had ever seen from a private landowner. The cameras changed Ethan's posture, though not his temper. He still did not confront residents on the trail. He still sent calm letters. He still gave Karen every chance to back away. But from that weekend forward, anyone entering the Miller place would not be walking into a rumor. They would be walking into a record. Samuel returned with better equipment in July. He had borrowed a modern GNSS receiver from his nephew's surveying firm, and together they began tying old calls to current coordinates. The summer heat was heavy under the trees. Cicadas screamed from the ridge. Sweat soaked Ethan's shirt as he cleared brush around the sycamore. The tree itself was enormous, pale-limbed and scarred, growing where the creek curved west. If the old survey was right, the iron pin should have been within a few feet of its root flare. But roots move soil, floods bury banks, men reset markers, developers move stakes. Time makes liars of simple assumptions. The metal detector gave weak signals everywhere. Samuel told Ethan that the original pin might be gone, but monuments were stubborn. A missing pin would not destroy the case if enough surrounding evidence survived. Ethan nodded, though disappointment settled in him like wet gravel. Late that afternoon, while packing up, Samuel noticed a line of stones half hidden beneath leaf litter above the creek bank. Not a natural line, not random. He crouched, brushed away dirt, and traced it with his fingers. It appeared to be an old erosion edge, built by hand decades earlier. The 1962 survey mentioned a stone marker below the crossing. The line suggested they were close. Samuel flagged the sycamore area again, this time wider. Ethan went home exhausted, showered, and opened another box from his father's closet. Inside were photographs, old hunting licenses, and a small oil-stained notebook. Robert had used it for maintenance notes. Fuel filter sizes, tractor belt numbers, dates when he replaced bridge planks. On one page from 1998, he had written that he had cleared brush from the old survey pin by the sycamore before planting 2 fence posts along the east line. Ethan drove back to the creek with a flashlight. The fence posts were gone, rotted down or removed, but 2 shallow depressions remained in the ground uphill from the sycamore. Using Robert's note, the old survey, and Samuel's flags, Ethan narrowed the search zone to an area no bigger than a kitchen table. The next morning, the detector chirped. Not loudly, just a steady, thin sound beneath a mat of roots and mud. Ethan did not dig it out alone. He called Samuel. He called a lawyer in Maryville. He photographed the undisturbed spot, the tree, the flagged reference points, and the GPS screen. Samuel arrived after lunch, knelt down with a trowel, and exposed just enough of the iron to confirm it without removing it. The pin was there. Ethan felt relief so sharp it almost buckled his knees. It was not victory yet. It was something better than hope. It was ground. His lawyer, Patricia Vance, was cautious. She reviewed the deeds, the plat, Samuel's preliminary findings, the HOA letters, the permit drawings, the camera footage, and the public record emails. She advised Ethan to send one final notice: no consent to enter, disputed boundary documented, removal of bridge prohibited, all contractors warned of trespass and potential liability. The letter went out certified to Karen, the HOA board, Mark Ellison, the contractor, and the HOA's attorney. Karen answered with silence. For 11 days, nothing happened. Before sunrise on the Monday Karen chose to act, Ethan's phone lit up on the nightstand. The gate camera showed headlights floating in the dark, then stopping in front of the chain. A contractor in a reflective jacket stepped into the frame with bolt cutters. For 1 second, the metal jaws hovered around the lock. Then the chain snapped and dropped into the mud with a dead little bounce. Ethan was out of bed before the alert finished vibrating. By the time he reached the farm road, the rain had started again, thin and cold, the kind that made clay shine like grease. A white contractor truck was already halfway down the lane. Behind it, a flatbed trailer carried a compact bulldozer with fresh yellow paint and a black blade slick with water. The machine looked too large for the narrow road and too confident for the place it had entered. Ethan parked his truck sideways before the bridge approach. He did not shout. He did not step in front of the blade. He stood in the rain and recorded the cut chain, the tire tracks, the posted signs, the truck, the trailer, the men unloading cones, and Karen Whitlock arriving in her clean SUV as if she had come to supervise a ribbon cutting instead of a trespass. Karen moved through the scene like the outcome had already been written. She pointed toward the bridge, then toward the creek bank, then toward the muddy strip where the workers had started placing stakes. Her face carried the calm satisfaction of someone who believed speed could become permission if the bulldozer got far enough before anyone stopped it. The first sheriff's cruiser arrived with its lights flashing against the wet trees. Karen reached the deputy before Ethan did. She presented the situation as a safety removal on association-managed greenbelt frontage. She had a clipboard, a site plan, and the polished patience of a person used to being believed first. The contractor stood behind her, silent but reassured by her certainty. 2 board members from Cedar Ridge hovered near the SUV. Residents began to gather at the top of the lane, drawn by the lights and by the message Karen had sent earlier that morning about long-awaited creekside improvements. Ethan handed the deputy the final notice letter, the deed, and a still image from the gate camera showing the chain being cut. The deputy looked from the photograph to the broken chain lying in the mud. The first crack appeared in Karen's composure, but it was small. She recovered quickly. She repeated that the HOA had an obligation to remove a dangerous, obsolete bridge, and that Ethan had refused to cooperate with a community safety project. Then Samuel Reed's old green pickup rolled down the lane. It did not look dramatic. No siren, no official seal, just a retired surveyor in a faded canvas hat, driving slowly through the rain with survey rods rattling in the bed. Karen barely looked at him at first. The bulldozer was still there. The board was still behind her. The residents were still watching from the road. She still believed the largest object on the property was the one with power. Samuel opened the 1962 survey on Ethan's hood and held the yellowed paper flat beneath one palm. The county building inspector arrived as he began walking the line. Samuel did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone. He read the land in the same quiet rhythm Ethan had heard for weeks. Old stone marker below the creek crossing, bearing line toward the west bank sycamore, iron pin at the root flare, then north toward the ridge. Karen's impatience grew with every step. She tried to pull attention back to the bridge's appearance, the resident complaints, the improvement plan, the insurance exposure, the children who might wander down to the creek. Each argument came dressed as responsibility, but the rain stripped the scene down to simpler things: a broken chain, posted signs, a machine on private clay, and an old man following a map older than the subdivision. Samuel stopped beside the sycamore. The tree stood pale and massive above the creek, its roots gripping the bank like knuckled hands. Leaves had collected around its base through years of floods and seasons. Mud covered everything. There was nothing there that looked important, nothing polished, nothing official, nothing Karen could argue with from a podium. Samuel knelt. The lane went quiet except for the creek and the soft ticking of rain on the bulldozer blade. Even Karen stopped speaking, not because she understood, but because everyone else had gone still. Samuel pulled on one glove, pushed wet leaves aside, and scraped the mud with a small hand trowel. The metal detector beside him gave a thin chirp. He scraped again. A root moved. Brown water filled the shallow hole. Then the trowel struck metal with a dull click. It was not a loud sound. That was what made it devastating. Samuel cleared the mud away with 2 fingers and exposed the rusted square head of an iron pin buried at the sycamore's root line. It had no shine, no label, no warning sign. It had simply been waiting under the dirt since 1962, holding its place while brochures were printed, lots were sold, meetings were held, fines were mailed, and Karen built an entire campaign on the hope that no one would find it. The inspector crouched beside Samuel and compared the pin location to the old survey. Samuel set the rod over the point, took his reading, and marked the line with orange flagging. The line ran cleanly through the wet brush and past the bulldozer tracks. The bulldozer was not near Miller land. It was on Miller land. So were the cones. So was the contractor's trailer. So was the path Karen had called community frontage. So was the bridge she had scheduled for removal. Karen tried to recover by saying the HOA had relied on professional materials. Ethan placed the county-approved Cedar Ridge plat beside the glossy sales map. The official plat stopped short of the creek. The marketing map drifted all the way down to it. Karen said the bridge was an emergency hazard. Ethan handed over the independent engineering report showing it was serviceable for limited private use and already posted with load restrictions. Karen said the work order was part of approved trail maintenance. Ethan showed the county application labeling his private bridge as an obsolete footbridge to be removed without naming his parcel or obtaining his consent. Karen said there had been confusion. Ethan produced the public record email from Mark Ellison warning that association control of the creek edge should be verified before work began. Karen's reply, printed beneath it, showed the board had proceeded anyway under the language of resident safety and common area maintenance. One by one, the props holding up her authority were taken away. The brochure was not a deed. The newsletter was not an easement. The HOA vote was not a boundary line. The contractor's work order was not permission. The loudest woman on the road could not move an iron pin that had been set before her neighborhood existed. The contractor stepped back from the bulldozer first. He looked at the deputy, then at the inspector, then at Karen, and refused to continue without corrected authorization. The inspector issued a stop work order on the spot. The deputy began photographing the broken chain, the posted signs, and the equipment location. Residents who had come to watch the removal of a dangerous bridge lowered their phones and started whispering for a different reason. Karen's voice sharpened as control slipped away. She insisted residents had paid for creek access. She said families had been promised use of the greenbelt. She said Ethan's refusal had damaged the community. In trying to defend herself, she finally admitted the truth in front of everyone. Cedar Ridge had treated the creek as theirs because selling that promise had been easier than proving it. No one needed to shout after that. Samuel's orange flags cut through the rain in a straight, quiet line. The rusted pin remained half exposed under the sycamore, ugly and immovable. The bulldozer, which had arrived as Karen's final answer, now looked stranded and foolish, its blade dripping water onto land it had no right to touch. Ethan stood by the bridge rail with the folder under his arm and said nothing. The land had spoken for him. By evening, the Cedar Ridge Facebook group was full of arguments. By the end of the week, Ethan had a temporary injunction prohibiting the HOA, its contractors, and agents from entering his land or interfering with the bridge. Patricia filed a civil claim for trespass, property damage, and costs related to survey verification and emergency legal action. The county opened a review of the HOA's trail improvement application. The planning office asked the developer for clarification on marketing materials that had depicted private land as accessible greenbelt. Karen tried to survive it politically. She sent residents a letter claiming the board had acted in good faith based on documents provided during development. But residents had seen the iron pin. They had seen the stop work order. They had heard her admit she knew of the dispute. They had also begun comparing their sales packets, and many found the same soft green line drifting down toward Ethan's Creek without any recorded easement to support it. Anger shifted direction. For months, Ethan had been the selfish outsider blocking families from nature. Now Karen was the president who had exposed the HOA to legal costs by trying to force access to land it did not own. Mark Ellison was the developer who had allowed buyers to believe a private farm bridge was part of their lifestyle package. The board members who had nodded along at meetings started remembering their doubts out loud. At a special HOA meeting in September, Karen was removed as president. Ethan did not attend. He had no interest in watching her fall for entertainment. The retired teacher from Cedar Ridge called him afterward and gave him the plain version. The room had been packed. Residents demanded invoices, emails, and legal explanations. Karen blamed the developer, the contractor, old maps, unclear county records, and Ethan's unwillingness to cooperate. None of it saved her. The settlement took longer. There was no movie-style fortune, no million-dollar check, no dramatic courtroom speech. Real disputes ended in paperwork, repair estimates, negotiated language, and signatures made by tired people in conference rooms. The HOA agreed to rescind all fines, pay for the damaged gate, replace the cut chains, repair ruts left by equipment, reimburse a portion of Ethan's survey and legal costs, and issue written notice to all residents that no access existed across Miller land. The county required Cedar Ridge to submit corrected trail maps. The planned Creekside Trail restoration was suspended indefinitely. Mark Ellison's company faced a county inquiry over misleading marketing representations, and several homeowners began their own complaints about the promised Greenbelt access. Karen sold her house the following spring. Ethan heard about it from someone else and felt less satisfaction than he expected. By then, he understood that victory did not undo the months of stress. It did not erase the nights he had lain awake listening for trucks. It did not remove the spray paint from memory or give back the hours spent in courthouse basements and lawyers' offices. Being right had still cost him something, just as it had cost his father. But it had not cost him the bridge. In October, Ethan repaired the damage at the approach. He added fresh gravel where the bulldozer tracks had cut deep. He replaced 3 more deck boards, sealed the rail, and installed a small bronze plaque on the inside post where only someone standing on the bridge would notice it. Miller Private Bridge, built 1964, restored 2024. On the first cool Sunday of November, Ethan carried a clay pot down from the cabin. The geraniums inside were red, bright against the gray wood and fallen leaves. His mother had always said red belonged at the end of the bridge because it gave the place a heartbeat. He set the pot on the east rail where she used to keep it. The creek ran clear that morning, shallow over limestone, whispering instead of roaring. Sunlight slipped through bare branches and touched the iron pin near the sycamore, now protected by a low ring of stones Samuel had placed around it. Up on the ridge, Cedar Ridge houses were visible through the trees, quiet and distant. Ethan stood on the bridge for a long time with both hands on the rail. He thought of his grandfather setting beams with borrowed equipment. He thought of his father sweeping leaves when his knees hurt. He thought of his mother's flowers. He thought of all the people who had tried to turn a family crossing into a community amenity because a brochure had made it convenient. The bridge creaked softly beneath his boots, old wood settling into morning air. It was not defiant, it was not grand, it was simply still there. And sometimes, that was the strongest answer a piece of land could give.